Welcome to WhatTheActualDev, the no bullshit development podcast.
No fluff, no marketing, just honest conversations, practical insights, and expert advice from developers who've been in the trenches.
My name is Aaron.
And I'm Bryan.
Let's dive deep into the human aspects of the software industry
and support each other on this journey.
Oh, man. I know it's been a little while since we did anything, so it's good to be back. It's good to see you again, man. I guess life got in the way and made this a little difficult for us. So yeah, it's our personal tech debt for life, I guess.
Heck yeah, man. You just got to keep persevering, right? It's a never. I love the saying, the only easy day was yesterday.
So, I don't think I've ever heard that one.
Yeah. Only easy day. That's what Navy SEALs say during buds. Only easy day was yesterday.
Yeah, because you made it through it alive, I guess, for the SEALs. I don't.
Yeah, I emulate. I'm a big poser. I emulate all my mottos from what they do in that grind. And I don't know. Like I said, when your day sucks and you're just like, I want to give up. You're like, it was only easy yesterday, so let's keep going.
Nice. All right. Well, I know we're gonna jump into technical debt and kind of what that has always been for us, and defining it and kind of talking about how we handle it and everything like that. So I think the first thing for me with this is kind of defining what that technical debt is, based around our definition of it. So and you've been doing this obviously a while. You've been in this a couple of decades, I think. I know I have been. So how do you define technical debt? Like, what is it in your eyes? Like, do you stick with the tried and true, like, tech debt is basically tech that has a lot of broken shit in it, or how do you define it?
I think that's a natural magnet for my tech debt. It's usually things, features we can't complete the way we'd want to. We have all these methodologies as a developer, all these techniques and architectural designs, but in the real world, when the metal meets the meat, you can't necessarily implement all of those and make the perfect picture in production, mainly because you're running around the time of the business. And so I think you kind of, lick your finger, stick it in the air to judge the speed of the wind to say, hey, are we going to do it this way? Or are we going to, improve it later? And, you see a lot of people phase one, phase two type development. So a lot of my tech that's always been into that realm, right? Like, we'll fix this properly later. Or the second version of that I've seen is I call them good idea fairies, is when people come in with all the kinds of ideas and thoughts they've had for your platform. It'd be great to have feature XYZ in this app, da da da, and then you're like, oh yeah, sure, okay, well, let's put that in the backlog, and we'll think about it when it becomes, our sprint planning or grooming if it's worth doing. So that's kind of how I've seen it naturally in my career. What about you?
I mean, it kind of depends on which part of my career I was actually in, because early part of my career was spent a lot in like local web houses, so like website based development, not necessarily app based development, and a lot of that tech debt comes down to, well, like bugs and things like that like you've just not had the chance to fix. And that stuff is, it kind of comes up with new browsers and everything like that you're having to go back and do the QA again and be like, oh, okay, well, this is broken now. So that's something we can't get to. It's not a huge issue. So just throw it in the tech debt backlog. And as I've moved into software development, it's become a lot more tech debt based around, well, we'd prefer it to do this. We'd prefer it to be this way, but we ain't got the time or the resources to do it. Okay, we'll just put it in a ticket in the backlog, especially, once I started working with Agile again, and we'll get to it eventually, except nobody ever fucking does. It's especially in startup realms, when we were working on the startup that kind of brought me into management, it would be, 3-4 years down the road, and we've still not touched the original tech debt backlog. And now we've got customers beating down our door that are just like, well, I need this feature. And it's just like, well, shit, we're never going to get to that tech debt.
Well, if I have no money to build it right, I have no money to hire more devs to build the added stuff. Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's interesting because do you, in your experience, have you seen tech deck items more of kind of a sit on the backlog for a long period of time, or a short period of time? You mentioned throwing bugs and feature improvements into that list. I assume some of that's kind of more of a short lived for you in managing.
Yeah, and it really depends on the organization, and how they kind of head on tech debt. Because there's definitely a lot of organizations, in my experience, that don't treat technical debt for what it is, which is a huge stain on your entire environment. A lot of companies just like, it's fine, like it's there, but we'll make it through it. And it's just like, yeah, but if you do something about it, you're probably going to make the overall experience a lot better for your customers and for your engineers.
Hmm. Yeah, I always I manage tech debt a little more ruthlessly than a lot of people. I usually go in once a quarter and I highlight everything and I delete it and start from scratch. Mainly because if you think about it, so as later in my career, as I started managing the development department, and working with business, I've always in my career I've always worked at a smaller company, so I've had really close relations with owners of the business and with the kind of the C-level people that make those calls and customers, and so I've had the opportunity to firewall a lot of this stuff, and you like I said, you get the good ideas that come along, things you want to do. A big one that I always got was phase one, phase two development. Hey, for phase one, we'll build the app this way so we can hit our deadline. And phase two, we'll come back around and we'll finish it. So we had a lot of like phase two tech debt. But what's interesting about the tech debt in the business world is there's always a fire burning, right? And when you get done with one fire, there's the next fire coming. And in the
Yep.
business world, it's important to make money. It's important to make sure our revenue's coming because that's what pays for the developers. And there's no time to make U-turns. And so I always experienced team members that would kind of stress out seeing the list of tech debt. And, oh, we got all these things we got to do. I had a few individuals specifically in my career where that was like their honeydew list was, checking off all these items off the backlog. And they would stress out over that, how big it was. So I was like, if things are really important, they'll come back to the log. If someone really wants an idea, they'll come back to us next month, next sprint, and bring it up and prioritize it from the business. And that was the thing, is I would be able to give some of these options and ideas to the partners and lead and say, hey, is this a priority in the business? Because if it's not, I'm just getting rid of it. We're not even going to see it. We're not going to experience because we're not going to get to it. And I'm a big minimalist mindset. I'm not going to have a big log of a random junk just sitting there in storage of, maybe we'll develop feature X or improve report Y. And so I just say, hey, we'll delete it. And anything that's super important, it'll pop back up. Yeah.
Well,
So
I mean,
I,
I think that comes back to the definition of technical debt. Is it intentional versus unintentional? Is it short term or long term? And is it actual tech debt, or is it nice to have? It's like, in my eyes, there's a difference between technical debt and, oh, this is a nice feature that we would like to eventually build. That's not technical debt. That's, like you said, a
mhm,
honeydew list. Um,
mhm,
and at that point, it's like you need to figure out a better way to kind of silo the individual like work streams. Tech debt should be like, hey, this is going to improve the code. This is going to improve the accessibility. This is going to improve how well the app functions. That's the kind of what I think of as technical debt.
mhm.
Whereas, if as I've started working more with product managers and in that agile mindset, like that's when you start getting into, oh, well, this feature that this customer wants that isn't really even paying us that much money. They're the ones defining technical debt. And it's like, that's not technical debt. Like,
Yeah. Well, and you know how many features I've built into applications that actually no customer uses, and like
exactly.
people are like, oh, you know, or we'd have our account executives, and they're like, oh, does this product do, you know, feature XYZ? I'm like, yeah, it's been in there for 4 years. Like, you're the one that asked us to put it in. Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that. So it's interesting in managing, you know, especially from a product perspective, what really is important to go in. And at times, I don't think that they ruthlessly prioritize their features as well when it comes down to the machine that builds it. Because really, that's what the development department is, right? We're a machine of workers, we're building it. We have certain time and deadlines, certain amount of energy we put into it. You can only accomplish so much in your sprint, you know. So if you can't meet the sprint, or you know, say you have multiple sprints if you fulfill that product, then you need to start removing features ahead of time, you know, cutting the fat out, so to speak, and really having a realistic of like, this is what you know, our product is. And if anything, you know, the managers, the business owners are going to see that and go, oh, that's not the product I want to release. And maybe they open the floodgates a little more for development, be like, okay, you have more time or more money to finish this product instead of having phase two sit on the backlog for 18 months.
Well, I mean, I think that comes down to another aspect of, like there's a lot of companies that are trying to force their way into product led development instead of like that domain driven development.
Mhm.
I'm all for the product teams being there and like the product teams helping us define what we build, as long as it's actually coming back from the actual end users. Like if that's actual user feedback that's actually coming back into help us build those features, then that's great. If it's
Mhm.
someone that's going in and doing what they think is their due diligence on a certain aspect of the product that you're building, if they're not gathering that feedback, then they're not actually doing product led development or domain design or domain driven development, because they're not getting that actual domain to give them an idea of what we need.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a good example of that, if I remember right, was Evernote, that company Evernote, right? When like cloud note taking was going, and for them to get funding, you know, they were very much clients feature specific development to get customers to get onto their platform and to make money. And over time, they had so many different types of features that their development team just couldn't maintain it all, and it actually really slowed everyone down, slowed development down. The company wanted to pivot. The company couldn't pivot because you had so many features. Um, and taking on that product, like you said, that product, oh, well, a customer will come on board if we build XYZ. They're promising so much money, you know, so let's build this product. Let's build this product and this product or feature inside of a, you know, an application or website. And I always love using that as a prime example because I have a similar example where we've built a lot of features out for our customers. You know, like we'll hook the customer if we build this out, and we never did. Like we always built the feature and then we never got the customer, or to the customer to the extent that was promised. And really, you know, it comes down to what is your company's domain, what is your company's product, and focusing on that instead of focusing on your customer needs. Well, that sounds bad. You want to focus on customer needs, but request like promises, you know, promises that, you know, and usually there's that layer, right? There's that account executive or someone trying to hook that new customer, a new revenue stream in. And you have to, again, back to realistically prioritize and validate and verify that that is something, if it's going to affect the machine of your, you know, intellectual property being developed and interject that into that system, it better be guaranteed that money's coming in. You know, when you think from a business owner perspective, because that's a lot of money you're spending for other people to work on something that has no validity to it.
Yeah, and that, I mean, that, I think that brings it back around to the what are the causes of the technical debt? Is it actual technical debt, like we
Mhm.
stated earlier, or is it perceived technical debt? Um, and what those causes are. For me, like a lot of what I've seen over the years, a lot of the causes for what is actual technical debt in my eyes has been rush development. We're trying to get this feature out as quickly as possible because we sold this to this client without really thinking about if we had it. It's like, at the startup, I used to joke with our development team. It was just like our CEO would go into this healthcare company or into this EHR company that we were trying to partner with. And he'd be like, yeah, we could totally fucking do that. And then I'm sitting in the meeting like, what the is wrong with
Oh
you?
boy.
No, we can't. And then like he'd be like, we can do that, right? And I'm just like, well, you kind of put me on the spot. So yeah, I guess so.
I mean,
And
it's job security for you, man. It's job security.
it was a way to get me to drink. That's what that was. I mean, especially when you're at that C level, you're sitting in a meeting with, this EHR that does hundreds of millions of dollars a year. You're a startup that's barely got any
Yeah.
income coming in whatsoever. And you're just like, well, fuck, if I don't say yes to this, we might as well just walk out right now. So I guess I'm going to work 80, 90 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's that perceived technical debt. It's not actual technical debt. It's CEOs not pay attention to what the fuck they're doing and selling something that we can't. And I mean, like there's a nuance to that. It's like, well, the CEO is there to help bring in money. He's basically like a high level fucking salesperson. Probably shouldn't have been, but like I get it. Like they're there to help bring that money in, but it's just like you're also shooting us in the foot, and you just derailed everything that we had on our product roadmap.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if they're going to ask for extreme things to make sure you have everything you need to succeed, you know, making sure you have the right tools. If it is manpower, if you don't have the development power, at least extend the time,
Yeah,
and really understand the realistic constraints. I think part of those too, I mean, it's totally not involved with tech debt, but in that communication is trust, right? If you were to go back and say, actually, it's going to take this long, they need to believe you and they go, okay, if it's going to take long, and be honest with you and be like, hey, I'm going to have to ask more, but to be fair of you working harder, we're going to, give you this type of prize at the end, or reward or compensation, reasons for that. But that never really happens, and you just keep grinding because again, there's always a fire burning, right? And you
yep,
get through that grind. Everyone forgets of that grind and moves to the next grind, moves to the next grind to get going, and then eventually everyone's burning out and losing their shit, and you realize what's happening here, and you never like celebrate the wins, you celebrate the hard work, and then let the relief valve blow and let everyone just kind of calm down for a little bit.
yeah.
Yeah.
But we'll give you a pizza party, right?
We'll let you do a 24-hour hackathon so you can work more for the company in your off hours, and we'll give you some pizza and soda.
Yeah,
I used to love those when I was young. I thought it was so cool in my 20s. I was like, man, this is gonna be fun. I'm gonna go program my coworkers for like 48 hours. This is gonna be great. Now as an older one, there's one that's led teams and going to that. I'm like, man, that's so much free money and work. And you don't get anything from it. You don't get a percentage of the product you envisioned or pulled out of the sky. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, unless you get equity in the company, but yeah,
Well, I mean, as I learned with the startup that I was in, like, or that first really big one, like, it doesn't matter if you have equity if the company doesn't sell. If the company
yeah,
goes under, and then you're just those were months and months of 80, 90 hour weeks just thrown at the wall.
yeah. Well, and
Um,
that comes full circle too. Like you said, if there's not money coming in, so what is the focus that we need to develop? What is the proprietary product that gives us an edge in the market space to bring that money? It's a catch 22, right? And then as that grows, then you have a little bit of slush to have some fun and go, hey, this would be a fun bell and whistle. But I think not saying it's products areas issue, but I think people feel that you need to have so many bells and whistles on an application to be effective, to be enticing and entertaining to our customers. And sometimes you get a lot of that added things where you're like, we don't need that. Let's do what we do really well and succinctly, that core element, and let's master that. And then the rest, will come and grow.
What I mean, that honestly comes like that is a form of technical debt in my eyes because now later on, you're building a lot of these features, and like you said, somebody never fucking uses it, and like 4 years later, you're like, okay, well, we've got all this extra code that's in there that we don't need. It
Yeah.
adds complexity, it adds build time. Like now we have to take the time to rip it out,
Hmm.
which becomes its own technical debt. Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, that's honestly that definitely could be a major cause for a company's tech debt. Like, what's been like the major cause in the places that you've worked? Because I know you and I have kind of come from different backgrounds. Like, I mean, obviously, like with you at Microsoft and stuff like that. I'm assuming tech debt and kind of how the tech debt comes around is a little bit different than a startup that's building these features or
Yeah.
building shit that's not needed.
Yeah. And I would say so. My ability at Microsoft is I get to work with other customers utilize the Azure cloud. And so these are various large and small companies that have global impacts. Sometimes they don't. Um, and what I've noticed when it leads to tech debt, when it leads to ideas of innovate, because I'm in the space of like innovation, like let's think about what we could do going forward. And when you have an anchor tied to your feet, it's hard to swim forward, right? It's hard to move forward when you have that weight. Um, and I think a lot of technical debt, honestly, is generated by poor development practices, cadences, and following methodologies. And it's the same whether you're a small team or whether you have 300 people on your team. It probably is just accentuated of the effects there. But from my experience coming from a small team before Microsoft, we a lot of our programs started brand new, so it was kind of like a hello world type start. And tutorials we had younger developers on the teams that we made a lot of programming decisions that made us tightly coupled. Unit testing features weren't quite as effective, and it was hard to get into. And part of that, we need to run and sprint to get to the deadline. Like, hey, we got to take this side route and implement all these VMs and servers to implement testing. It's going to delay you a couple weeks. We're like, oh, we'll test later. Let me do a happy path test. But then we build this product, we build this application, works great, works for the customer, and then eventually you hit some sort of performance bottleneck. Your company grows. Heaven forbid, you're successful, your company grows, and all of a sudden you have this tech debt of, hey, these reports are not performing, or this processing queue is not performing. And so what caused that, right, is something that's probably built months, years ago, and really comes down to we implemented poor practices and methodologies, if anything, as well as the development culture. Whether you're siloed, the big companies I see a lot of times is the individual teams are siloed. Moore's law, right? It's or Conway's law, Moore's law. Where we mimic the development. One of those laws, mimic your application development mimics your culture.
Yeah.
And if you're siloed, you're not going to have loose coupling. You're not going to have growth. You're going to have reinventing the wheel multiple times in those different products, and that's going to lead to tech debt as you need to change and evolve and innovate. So I would say, from a technical standpoint, out of the business side, debt comes from poor practices.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to. I don't want to segue into too much that's like, oh, this is bad code. I definitely there is some aspect of technical debt where yeah, it could just basically be bad code was written.
Yeah.
But you don't really know all the nuances like of what was the reason for this bad code. Like was there pressure from stakeholders that are trying to get you to prioritize features over quality? Like, is it you had the wrong person in the architecture decision that shouldn't have been a part of it, or maybe they didn't understand the entire context of what the feature was, or something like that? Like, it comes down to a lot more than just bad code in my mind. And
Hmm.
I think some of that could actually be solved by like better documentation and testing, like you were talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of hard because it's D all the above, right? In different layers of that business. And if you can set it up right where the business leaders in your department can kind of firewall from the product side or the stakeholder side, you have your senior developers or architects that can help implement some of those good methodologies from a programming side. And really, you have a fantastic DevOps culture where your teams are constantly upskilling and growing and being better engineers than they were the day before. That you hope that that tech debt naturally minimizes itself. I feel like it's always going to be there because you're never going to have a perfect world, right? You're never going to know the amount of customers and throughput you're going to get for an application. Sometimes you got to test in production. Hey, we're building this thing for Black Friday sales. It's our first time into it. We hope we can get 1 million people. Oh shoot, we got 10 million people, and it crashed on us. Okay, well now we have that threshold. We have a new baseline knowledge point to test. So I think sometimes it's a perfect storm where all of that goes wrong. Sometimes I think we miss a few things in those. It's complex for sure in the layers of business.
That's definitely something I had to get used to whenever working in the web and then moving over into app development. That was definitely a major piece for me because it was just like when you're in the web, and I mean, granted, it's been a long time since I've been in the web industry. A lot of that work was done with the mindset of fuck it, we'll do it live.
Yeah,
We're doing it on production. Like there is no
yeah,
other environments. And now, like I've noticed, the more I'm in software development and I've seen that tech debt just mount and mount and mount, I'm just like, no, we need multiple environments. Like, don't do this to me. Even in the web pieces, like, for my personal portfolio site, like I have, dev, test, and prod. And then, like, there's obviously the CI/CD platforms to help you get all that managed.
hmm
But yeah, like it honestly helps pay down that technical debt without having to do a whole lot, in my opinion.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think an aspect of that tech debt from a performance standpoint is logging and metrics on your production and applications. And when I say applications, websites, mobile apps, APIs, all the programming, to understand what what is your application involved with in the live jungle of the world. And then you can use those metrics to start testing your QA environments, your dev environments, right? Because we all build it, it works on my machine type uh, standpoint. It's like, hey, in development, we had 3 people on the team, we went through the site, we did the happy path that the product owners wanted to do. As a user, I want to do XYZ. Yeah, that all worked. It was great. It was fantastic. And then you go into production, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, we have load balancing in different regions. So now we have, different latency issues. And we introduce a race case to some sort of shared variable. And then all of a sudden you have, something you totally couldn't test for because, we all want to save money as business. So I'm sure your dev and QA environments will have one instance,
Yep.
and that's just one facet of infrastructure of application development. Like, I don't think a lot of people understand the hornet's nest that having a fully functional app consists of,
Yep.
and all the ways it can fall apart. That's one thing I've in my career as I've learned is just taking that step back and seeing that bigger picture, and you're just like, holy moly, there's a lot of layers, and each layer has multiple facets of ingress and egress of issues. So
They're like an onion.
yeah, yeah, Shrek, it's an onion. Uh,
Hey, they're
you
making
know,
another one. I'm excited. So
I think that's all Disney released lately in their D23 is a bunch of repeats. Well, I guess Shrek is DreamWorks, so they're following suit.
yeah. Hey, whatever. It works. What I mean, that honestly comes down to what is actual technical debt, though. Like, you're in there and like you're noticing all these pieces that are coming up, and it's just like, oh, well, we're running slow in prod on this aspect. Okay, that's an actual production defined tech debt.
hmm
And then it's like, oh, well, is it breaking for the customers and everything like that? So that's when you have to get really good at prioritizing and everything like that.
Have you
So
ever seen the tech debt that's you can't solve in the sense of like, say you have that production issue because you have those users, but you can't reproduce the scenario that causes it, but it's there.
yeah,
You've seen it, you've witnessed it. All the devs know, and they're like, well, it hits, on a Friday, but we can't reproduce it to save our life. What do we do?
Well, I mean, that kind of comes back to, what are the costs? Like, what are the hidden
Mhm.
costs of this tech debt? And depending on the type of tech debt, like that, the cost of that tech debt can be different depending on the severity of the tech debt, how long you've been putting it off,
Yep.
um, you know, and we'll touch on this a little bit later, but like the leadership team, like does the leadership team actually understand what is there as far as tech debt? Do they understand tech debt and how important it is to pay that down?
Yeah.
um but like there's a lot of really hard hidden costs that people don't really associate with that, and a lot of it comes back to being paid by the developers, in my opinion.
Mhm. I think costs and intangible costs. I think there's a lot of that too. People want to think of just programming hours to build something. You're like, well, but what about to maintain this? It can take many various hours to maintain this, and there's cost there. So is it cheaper to design and architect this properly at the beginning and go a little slower to market? Or is it worth having that added weight for over the year to maintain and kind of just this is how we do it? Think of like your manual deploy. You talk about CI/CD with your application. You think about the times where we manually deployed all these things compared to automating that. Think about all the time we saved because it's faster. It's intangible cost, but it took time to implement those processes.
What is it like, so for you, what, and kind of bring this back to your, I say that a lot. I need to get better about that. Bring this back around. Anyway,
Full
uh,
circle. We don't want to leave our listeners hanging.
yeah, we're doing like fucking marketing terms in our damn. Anyway, um, so like, what's been like the biggest hidden cost that you've seen on the teams that you're working with at Microsoft? Like, is it like paid by the developers? Is it paid by the product team? Like, how severe does it get there?
That's a hard one. I wouldn't say it's specifically one more than the other. I think one thing I've noticed with teams is trying to empower the individual to do more. I have a big focus on like developer velocity, getting applications to production as a focus. And when you have a lot of these tech debts and the developers trying to innovate or trying to do something new, and this tech debt slows them down, you don't have that production driven drive, and you also you have those squirrel moments in the sense where you lose not the excitement, but there's a little gusto, wind taken out of your cells of like, yeah, I'm going to go get this done, and you realize you have to do all these things to get to that point to do it, and you're like, oh, well, this is just another Tuesday now at 9 o'clock, and I got to process, what it is, or I got to ask for resources from someone, so now I'm back in a holding pattern. I think a lot of costs there, and that kind of comes back to the DevOps kind of culture concepts, but your developers, that's where all your the velocity and being able to get code to productions where the money's going to come from the business, where the developers are excited to do some that inspiration, those moments of inspiration to execute on that and to actually program and to move on that is key. It's easy to get distracted in this day and age with all the technology we have as a professional sitting at our desks, and if something that needs to work or a tech that we have that causes you to say, hey, I have to maintain and update these things manually, and you're like, at the end of it, you're like, I'm done. That's an intangible cost that could cost the company unforeseen amounts of money because you missed deadlines or you just lost the inspiration, the morale there.
What
I think that's the biggest impact I've seen. It's not necessarily like the cost of like, hey, more hours, but I myself have experienced that where you've come in like on a Monday, so your week starts, you're like, all right, I'm ready to rock and roll. And you just start getting hit with all these things that you have to do or maintain and then you're just like, oh, geez, all right. Like, my quality of life as a developer, this just kind of sucks. It's not fun. Um, you know, I'm very big on, do what you love to do and the perfect world of programming, it's a blast to build things. But when it's a headache to build, you're just like, all right, here we go again.
Yeah, and I mean that's honestly been the biggest cost that I've seen with tech debt is that quality of life for developers because when you're a junior that's coming straight out of school and you're just excited to get into the code and you're like, oh yeah, it's tech debt and like they're not giving me God, where does the hell does that come from? There it goes again.
Every
Uh,
episode, man.
it's got to be something to do with Apple or maybe it's StreamYard. I don't know. But it comes back to those junior engineers are just excited to be working on code, so they're like a little more energized for it. You get these seasoned veterans, I guess, out there, and you've been doing this 15, 20, 25 years, like,
Mhm.
and you see some of the technical debt that's just like, what the fuck were these people thinking, or something like that.
I've
Um,
seen this before.
yeah, exactly. It's just like, how could
Mhm.
they be so stupid to do this? And it's just like, you were there once too, so shut up. One, two, like that it definitely makes it harder to stay focused for these older engineers that are already like moving into that second stage of their career,
Mhm.
and they're just like, I don't want to work on this crap. Can we just give it to the junior? Like, let
It's
me
another
build
for
something
loop is
exciting.
written another way. Yeah. Yeah.
Let me do something exciting, you fuckers. Um,
Yeah.
and the kind of like one of the pieces about technical debt is that it does take those senior level engineers and stuff like that and kind of pushes them away from the excitement. They just kind of start to lose their, I guess, God, I hate to say it, but excitement again.
Yeah.
It makes them lose their excitement for building the code. And I've seen a lot of senior engineers that are, once they get to that point where they're having to pay down that technical debt, like they start getting very disenfranchised with it. And they're like, hey, can you just put me on like a skunkworks team or something so I don't have to deal with this shit? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I mean, I've been there too. So,
Well, I'd say we both been in our career long enough. We probably are that senior dev. I know times where we were working on a different version of an app, and I was like, I've built this app multiple times. I'm ready for something else, man. I need a different domain. Let's reach for the stars a little more here. It's been, a handful of years since we've worked on it. Like, there's some new technologies out. Let's use that. I 100% agree. I think that's also a fantastic, talking about resolving tech debt or preventing it to grow, utilizing that senior experience with juniors and cultivating a team of learning.
mhm,
There's a lot of experience. Yeah, new technologies come out, great, but they're always built upon the predecessor technology that someone that's been around the field was, a pro with. The and there's reasons why the new technology is built the way they are because that pain driven development that senior had is like, oh, that's why they wrote because I have had to do it the hard way. It's like when you hear the guys about doing their punch cards, and I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't program that way. No, thank you. Right? Or the memory pointing in C++, and you're like, oh man, I would hate to program at the assembly level. But what I do at in the C# level, it's still connected. So I feel like that's a time to where you could really grow a team together. Both have to offer, right? You have that excitement from the junior and the new stuff to help influence and reignite that flame for the senior developers. A senior developer has the wise wisdom of that pain driven development to impart on the junior so that they can hopefully be better in their career, maybe move faster in their career as well. Um, there's a lot of, again, intangible potential there that you could grow
yeah,
that team together.
exactly. And that kind of when, in my eyes, the best time to pay technical debt is all the time. And
All the
that's,
time.
yeah, exactly. And that could be done in a number of different ways, and I've found a few ways that work, but a lot of people want to keep kicking that can down the road, as the product teams like to say. um, but in my opinion, the longer you kick it down the road, the worse it's going to get. Like, yeah, you may need to push off a feature or something like that, or you may have to work on less features. But if you're not paying down that technical debt every sprint or every day, if you're in waterfall, it's going to come around and bite you in the ass. And I mean,
Yeah.
there's definitely a bunch of different ways you could do that. Like, I know one way that's worked well with the teams that I've worked with in the past is what people call minutia time. where essentially like you're setting aside like an hour or two a day for each individual developer. And it's just like there's the normal product development queue, but then there's also the tech debt queue. And like every day, go find something on the tech debt queue and work on it for an hour or two and
Yeah.
just dedicate that percentage of time daily. Um, that's definitely worked pretty well at the places
Yeah.
that I've been.
I really like that. I like that because when got into it, I heard a lot of we're too busy to do those things. I'm leading this team, and my team's telling me, "Hey, we're too busy to do that."
Yep.
And most people would just say, "Well, hell with it. You just get this done. This is part of the call." And you call it minutia time. I always thought of I'm a big proponent of like chipping away at things, right? Discipline, consistency,
Hmm.
and over time you'll succeed. And so I evolved our sprint time. I said 20% of our sprint, whether you want to do in the morning, whether you want to do tonight, whenever you want to work on this, because some people will wait till the Friday of. Like 20% of our work will be these backlog tasks or maintenance tasks or cleanups. We all do it, and you can decide when to do. Because I always had I had developers that are like, I love to focus for like 3 hours and do nothing but that for 3 hours, and
Hmm.
kind of be more domain driven. So for them, their domain was bug fixing or technical debt, and they would want to go for half a day. I'm like, that's fine. 20% of the sprint, however you want to do it, because you got to set that time aside to solve those issues. You can't just pile it on top of everyone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know where we worked together. One of the things that they did was they had that team that was dedicated to just bug fixes. The front line,
Hmm.
I guess customer, I guess they were CS. Um, but I mean, obviously that throws back into there's going to be a lot more burnout because if all you're doing is working on technical debt, you're going to fucking hate your life.
Yeah,
And I mean,
yeah.
you can definitely do that and like have a team that's dedicated to that. But in my opinion, if you don't rotate those people out every, couple of weeks or months or hell, even quarters, you're going to have a lot of people that are just like, if all I'm doing is fixing bugs, fuck this shit, I'm out.
Well, or you have the developer that just that's all they want to do, and they're like, do I apply them there? And that comes in culture, right? Like, who do you want to hire and who do you want to be on your team to identify those? Because personally, I hate bug rotating. My first job was like that. It's like once a month I had a week of doing bugs, and I was trying to solve website issues where I was like, I've never been in the side of the website. I have no idea what's going on. I'm going to create more bugs solving this bug. Um, or I'm going to try to go and try to learn from whoever owns it, the stake owner or the domain expert. And then I only fixed 2 bugs that week, and everyone's like, "Well, what'd you do for the week?" I just personally despise that approach because I feel like the bugs of the domain you work on, it's just part of the project.
Yeah.
I think you have those innovators, like I said, the guys that want to be on the skunk works. I just want to constantly innovate R&D. I'm kind of in that boat. I really want to build new things, but I do understand the things the turbulence I create behind me. Like that's part of the project that I have to work on too. If I create a bunch of tech debt, I'm just trying to drive forward to build a new idea, and I have to clean up the fallout for that. And so I love just mixing that type of work within my normal work, and that leaves multiple people working on that way. So as we're dealing with certain bugs and not in our domain, we can help each other with that. I feel like when you have that, CS team, the support team, or that bug team, they kind of put themselves on the island of themselves. For 2 weeks, these two are doing this team. No one talked to them. They're focusing on bugs. It isolates, mentally, and just intangibly or unintentionally puts whoever's on the team on an island compared to the rest of the development team because you have separate focuses and you've
Yeah.
divided that now. And it's important to keep everyone together as much as you can.
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why that minutia time thing that was talking about, like that helps keep those silos a little bit less
Yep.
like major, in my
Hmm.
opinion, because you're allowing yourself to kind of not compartmentalize those engineers and that process and everything like that. And definitely gives a lot more opportunity for working together on something and figuring it out together.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with you. I think having a separate team for it is more detrimental than it's really helpful.
Yeah.
Um, and that kind of leads into the idea of what is the role of leadership in not only defining the technical debt, building the processes around it, but also the remediation of it.
I think they have a huge role. Um, you know, I've seen a few, I've had a few bot managers and leaders that have experience, but I've taken that experience to come up with my own way of doing it. Personally, for me, like we talked about at the beginning, we get to a certain point of a threshold where you're like, you know what, hell with this list. We're never going to get to it. Let's just clear the plate. Mentally, it's gone. Let's recycle. Like I said, the important things will come back. Everyone's got good ideas. They're a dime a dozen. I come up with thousands of them. Doesn't mean we work on them. Doesn't mean they need to float around. And if it's important, it'll come back, And the important things that come from a tech debt, like, oh, production went down here and there, we're already working on those. Those are already in the next sprint. That's what I'm saying. Like, like once a quarter, like, it's that mentality of like, how do you clean out your closet? The suggestion is if you haven't worn the clothing item in the last 6 months, you're probably not going to wear it. So we kind of do that. If the tech has been there for 6 months, just get rid of it. I'm not saying, delete yesterday's tech debt, but a rolling window, anything that's older than 6 months, it's just gone, or 2 months. I was down to a month because we were at the point where I'm like, if it was super important, it becomes top priority next sprint. Production's down. Hey, that came priority today, right now. We're all working on it. Everything that was planned goes to the side. So the important tech debt that the company needs to succeed is going to be thrusted onto your plate no matter what. Now, if it's going to sit there as a leftover for 2 or 3 sprints and you got to reheat it up, no, 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 no. There's plenty more coming down the pipe. We'll just chuck it. And that's just kind of the way I've always thought about it. Because for myself, I don't need that luggage. I don't need that baggage hanging around. I have other things to move forward that are more important to focus on.
I definitely like that approach. I mean, there's a couple
It's
instances.
drastic. It's
Yeah.
drastic.
Well, I mean, and the only thing that makes me hesitant to say, yeah, I'm totally on board with that is the idea that, there are certain tech debt items that become an ongoing issue that if you just got rid of it every
It will
six
come back
months,
though. It'll be
yeah.
back, and then
But
you have to.
the problem is though, if it's coming back, it may come back when there's no room for wiggle. And, like shit, let's say you got like 3 or 4 servers running CentOS. I'm speaking from experience on this one. You got three or
Okay.
four servers that are running CentOS, and that's a dead product now. So like you're like, oh well, I'll take care of that, at the end of the window for it.
Hmm.
And then you delete it after 6 months, and then it's not front of house, front of mind, and then that window starts to close, and you're like, oh fuck, like what do I do now?
I'll counter you though. If you know that deadline's coming, that should have been higher up on the priority list back in the
I,
day. And that's the thing, that's poor planning, right? If you have
yeah,
something that's like retiring end of life and that's at the bottom, like you just, oh shit, it was on the list and I deleted it and forgot about it, then that's poor plan from the beginning of prioritizing our work. And that's a leader, that's a business side thing. I give you that. Like, I understand the scenarios, but deleting the list is not what caused that. That was prioritizing that list and saying, hey, let's groom this. Oh, this end of life thing to modernize is going to take 6 months. We have 9 months till this is due. That probably should be number 2 on the
yeah.
list,
Well, I
you
mean,
know?
it comes back to two things with that. One is the obviously that role of leadership, but if you don't have, so like let's say we are the leaders in that technical space and the engineering side, and it's a product led development team. They're coming back and they're like, yeah, this feature is really important. You got to make sure that the leadership of the engineering side and the leadership that's above them, and that is kind of the counterpart to that product team leader, is also understanding of that. And that's where that role of leadership becomes really important, because they need to be there to be that advocate of, hey guys, you really need to listen to the team on this one. Like, this is a huge issue. You're going to have to give them the time. And if you don't have that buy-in from leadership and they don't trust their team, or for whatever reason, they just don't listen to that team, that's when it becomes more of an issue of, we deleted it, it came back,
Yeah.
now we're all fucked.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The things that are important to whoever the shot caller is that will already naturally be in your top 10 and
Yep.
be planned for your next sprint or two ahead of you.
Yep.
But if you have stuff on your eye and you're like, oh, we'll get to it in 8 months, just get rid of it because between now and 8 months, you're going to have 47,000 other things that are going to dump on top of that thing. And you're like, oh, remember that one thing? And oh, I don't know, the guy who even started doesn't even work here anymore. So I don't know. We'll leave it there because
Well,
nah.
that's kind
I'm
of
not a
like,
hoarder. I'm not a hoarder. It's just my approach.
no, and like I'm throwing shit at the wall here to see if I could trip you up a little bit. But like that kind of comes back to the idea of, if we're not giving the correct definition to this tech debt and we're not defining actual technical debt as
Mhm.
something that's more important, then we're not doing our due diligence as an engineering leader. And it could be, I mean, it's kind of like that idea of a failure to plan on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine,
Yeah.
but it kind of is, like, because
Yeah.
sometimes, like, your server's going down, it's a fucking emergency.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I ain't sitting on no backlog. I mean, we've all had it. I've had plenty of, after it's 2:30, you're eating a snack in the break room and something goes down and you're just like, oh, hold on, drop everything, what's happening, right? Because the application went down. We're all going to have those kind of catastrophic drops. Um, I think there are different priorities of issues you may face in your application that maybe some are higher priority. Hey, if something goes south in this aspect of our application, that's our bread and butter. So we need to have that solved right away compared to, hey, this report would be nice. When we select all customers for a year, it's too much data and then the app just starts to choke. That
Yeah.
doesn't sit the same level as, hey, our bread and butter feature is not working. They're not one to one. So yeah, you can put, like, what I would do in that scenario is, one, we're either dropping everything and fixing that issue in the bread and butter, the heart of the app, or hey, that's coming in next sprint. And by the way, Bryan does 1 week sprints, so that's coming quick. And I'm always a 1 week sprinter. Really easy to manage. People have their days off, and my sprints are from Wednesday to Tuesday. So, because how many times I want to be off Monday or Friday, and there's always some sort of Scrum ceremony meeting that I have to be in, but I can't miss. So you do those Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and you do 1 week sprints, so that way you're not overwhelmed with planning.
No,
Because
I
Bryan
absolutely agree
hates
with that.
rituals.
Well, I mean, not only that, like, if you're pushing code on a Thursday or Friday and then you break everything, then you've got to spend the entire fucking weekend trying to fix it. It's like,
Yeah.
release on Wednesdays. And
Release whenever. I'm at the point where it is worth the time and money to set yourself up that you can release whenever you need to.
well,
But I've,
that's
I've worked in, and it's rare now these days than it was. But I work in global setting type companies, right, where there's no 9 to 5. Hey, let's deploy after hours. Well, it's
yeah,
after hours for you in the mountain time zone, but in the East time zone, they're still working. Or in the UK and Europe, they're still going. Australia, shit, it's morning for them,
yeah.
the next day. So it's always like the application's always running. So it's like, no, we're going to do this. We're going to deploy whenever we need to deploy. You have a certain, that's part of your continuous integration pipeline to have all those checks in place, and we launch.
I think that's a whole another episode in and of
Whole
itself.
nother episode. But like I said, the reason I do the 1 week sprints and I do the middle of the week of the ceremonies is mainly for developers having their weekends and long weekends because they come up. And a 1 week window is enough work to manage mentally. 2 weeks just feels too much sometimes. Now, depending on the size of your company, of course. But even then, like, I don't want to size work for 2 weeks when things could be coming down the pipeline. Like, well, what's going on for this week? My calendar is not even filled out 2 weeks ahead in advance, my personal calendar. So again, it's how Bryan runs. Bryan's leading the department. That's going to how we're going to fetch. I'm going to see what works for the team if it works really well. I've done 2 weeks. I've done month-long sprints. Try that. We've given that a go, but it seems like the week always seems to work the best. So if things are hitting the fan and that tech debt arises, it's going to be showing up in the next sprint pretty quick.
Yeah.
That reporting tech that we talked about, the report feature not fully working for a certain scenario. Sure, put it on the backlog if we can fit it in, as you said, with that, minutia time and that 20%. It should get in the next sprint or two or three. But if it doesn't, because we have a ton of those, then it's time to eject those. And if it's really important, it'll come back up, and then you'll prioritize it a little higher because apparently it's more important to solve.
So to start to kind of wrap this up, what for you is the most important thing about like kind of defining the tech debt and how to handle it? Like what's the piece that literally like gets you fired up that you're just like, this is like what we need people to get from this?
So, what's identifying tech debt? I
Well,
think we
just
hit. I think if I was to assess tech debt into not the stereotypical way, I think we kind of already talked about it, is we treat it as if it's part of the normal workflow. It is a first class citizen for a new feature. It sits at the table for new innovation, and it needs to just be planted within our workflow. So whether it's designed from product, poor planning, business planning, whether it's something that happened in production and hey, we programmed it wrong, they all are treated and prioritized exactly the same as all the other work.
yep,
And keep that tech debt, that backlog short. If you have a long log, again, you're going to have a lot of things you're never going to get to because the log is always having stuff come into it. You can dam that river and back it all up. But you think there's, and then you dam, there's always an exit for flow because there's always a flow constantly coming in. Except for maybe, the seasonal water dams where you block it for the summer because you don't have any like snow runoff.
yeah.
But that never happens in our scenario, right? There's always stuff coming in because, again, the world's always on fire. The business is always moving. Stuff always comes up. So don't let it linger. I guess my tips: don't let backlog items linger, and prioritize it just like your normal work. And the important ones will float to the top.
Yeah, I think that's definitely along the lines of where I'm at as well. But I definitely want to touch on the idea that, in my opinion, leadership has way bigger of a role than they've normally taken at the places that I've been at. They don't see the importance of them being a proponent for paying that tech debt down. A lot of leaders get caught up in the, well, I'm having to appease the powers that be, and
Mhm.
if I don't keep them appeased, then they're going to come down hard on the engineers. It's like, yeah, I get that. I've been in that position. It definitely makes sense, but at the same time, you also have to be there to kind of stress how important it is that if you don't pay down that tech debt, that later on it's not going to matter what's going on. Like it's going to explode, and when it does, it's going to be a major heartache for the company, for the engineers, for the leaders. It's really important in my
Yeah.
opinion.
No, I like that. And I think even leaders that aren't, say tech savvy, I mean, you got to trust your team and trust the people you've hired. Trust your domain experts. If I was to come to you and say, hey, we want to do this, and you were like, that face, that reaction should be a major red flag and go, okay, hold on here. Apparently I am not on the same wavelength as you. So I, as the leader, need to set some time aside and go, hold on here before we pull the trigger. I need to get your side of the story here and your perspective, and all that information, and then reassess the decision you made before you, you know, before you made the decision to come to Aaron and say, hey, Aaron, this is what we're going to do. Take your perspective and go, hold on here. Let me rethink this. Okay, now I have all the information here. Let's make a viable one. And I think sometimes you have to make the hard call no matter what, right? Like
Yep.
this work's just going to suck. We're doing it. But I think you need to show some empathy as a leader to those and understand, hey, it's going to be hard work and reward them for that hard work, right? I think salaried employees somewhat get the short end of the stick at times. Like it's great to be salaried, but I can take time off. But when I at any point because I'm salaried, but when I work extra hours over and over and over and over again, that never really gets rewarded in the same sense
Yeah.
as like an hourly with overtime. And I'm not saying, hey, let's, start tracking hours and pay, double time. But there are ways that leaders can, reward and motivate teams to go that extra mile for them because that extra mile for you is a lot of hard work. It's lost personal hours with their family. And if they're not getting anything out of it, they're just like, well, good thing at least I have a job. And they're
Yeah.
looking at the minimal reasons of why they're there. Well, at least I have a job. Like, you don't want that. You want them to be glad to be where they work and proud and realize, hey, when I put in this effort, I'm going to get something out of it. So hell yeah, I'll put that effort in every time.
Well,
You
and
know,
I mean that's definitely a bigger issue, and I mean it kind of comes around
yeah,
to
I was blowing out of proportion here, but I feel like culture stems all this, right?
yeah.
It's a
Well,
development of it.
and I mean servant leadership. We did that episode on it. It definitely helps in this aspect of making sure that you're thinking about how can you help the engineers, and that definitely plays directly into what you're
Yeah,
saying right now.
and trust
Um,
the team, right? If you told me, Brian, we're not going to hit this, I wouldn't. My first response would be like, "Well, figure it out." I'd be like, "All right, let's figure out. Tell me why." And maybe it comes to a compromise. Maybe it really truly isn't possible, and I need to know that. So, as the business side of things, I can make a better decision, and I need to take it back to the business. So sometimes it's two steps forward in the meeting, one step back because you gained more information, and you just keep going forward.
no,
Uh, and I don't know if I have seen leaders that do that very well, and I have experienced leaders that have not done that, and I've been on that short end of the stick as well. Um, Almost willingly to be on that short end of the stick, thinking, "Oh, I'll be this great employee." That never really that perception never comes across as much as you think it would.
no. All right. Well, I think that's kind of the closing thoughts for this episode. I definitely we're gonna start getting back into this a little bit more. We had to take, obviously a little break to deal with some personal issues and stuff like that. And
Summer
just
fun, man. Summer fun.
yeah, I mean, just needed a little bit of a break. We only got 4 episodes out before we had to take that break, but I think we're getting back into it now. And definitely, if you are listening to this and you know anybody that either wants to come on and discuss something very important to them in the development community, or if you just want to come on and talk yourself, obviously reach out to Brian and I. We'd love to have you on. And yeah, what you got, Brian? Any closing thoughts?
No, I like it. I think it'd be great to have, talk to other people. I'm sure I love perspectives and seeing on taking tidbits from that and growing what I believe in and drive forward. So all are welcome. All are welcome. So
Awesome.
thanks for listening.
Yep. Thanks for listening, everybody. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks with something new. Thanks for listening. See you.